smell of hickory smoke and charcoal always reminded me of better days. Days when my late wife Elena would stand beside me at this very grill, her apron dusted with flour from the biscuits she'd been making inside, stealing pieces of brisket when she thought I wasn't looking. 41 years I stood at this grill. 41 years this backyard held nothing but laughter, love, and the kind of warmth that has nothing to do with fire. But that was before Vanessa. My name is Gerald Hutchins. I'm 67 years old. I have 2 sons, Marcus and David, a daughter named Renee, and 7 grandchildren who call me Pops, with a kind of joy that makes my chest feel like it might burst wide open. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer, built bridges across 4 states, helped design the flood infrastructure that saved an entire county back in 2003. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you so you understand who I was before that Saturday afternoon, and who I remained even when someone tried to make me feel like nothing. I retired 3 years ago, 6 months after Elena passed. The house felt too big. The grill felt pointless. For a while, I'll be honest with you, I let things go. The lawn got a little wild. The gutters went 1 season without cleaning. I stopped cooking big meals because what was the point of making a feast for 1 old man sitting alone at a table built for 8? My son Marcus noticed. He started calling more, dropping by on Sundays, and then one spring afternoon he showed up with a shovel and spent the entire day fixing up the yard without me even asking. That's the kind of man Marcus is. Quiet, steady, built like his grandfather but soft-hearted like his mother. Vanessa was Marcus's wife of 4 years. She was sharp, I'll give her that. Quick with numbers, quicker with words. She had a way of smiling while she said something that cut right through you, so that by the time you felt the sting, she was already laughing and you looked like the fool for flinching. Marcus loved her. That was enough for me to try. Lord knows I tried. But Vanessa had decided early on, I don't know exactly when, that I was someone to look down on. It started small, a comment here and there about my old-fashioned way of doing things, a barely concealed eye roll when I told a story about the old neighborhood. Once, at Christmas, she leaned over to her sister, not quietly enough, and said, "He just rambles, doesn't he?" I pretended not to hear. Marcus pretended not to notice. We were both protecting something fragile, I suppose. But that barbecue Saturday, that was different. That was deliberate. It was the last weekend of June. Marcus and Vanessa hosted the family gathering at their place, since their backyard had more space now that they'd put in the new deck. I'd offered to bring the brisket, my recipe, Elena's recipe really, 22 hours of slow smoke, a dry rub she perfected over 15 years of summer cookouts. The grandchildren went wild for it every single time. That brisket was the closest thing to Elena I had left, and I poured every bit of her memory into making it right. I arrived early to get the smoker set up. Marcus hugged me at the door. Renee was already there, helping with the salads, and her husband Thomas was chasing the little ones around the yard. My grandkids, Marcus's 3, Renee's 2, came barreling into me like small warm cannonballs, and for a moment, standing in that yard with those Barbies climbing my legs, I felt like myself again. Whole. Then Vanessa came outside. She looked at the smoker, then at me. Then she made a comment to her friend Brianna, who had no business being at a family gathering but always seemed to appear where she could cause the most damage, about how the old man insists on doing everything the hard way. I kept my eyes on the fire. By early afternoon, the yard was full. Cousins, neighbors, Marcus's work friends. The smell of the brisket had people drifting toward the smoker with wide eyes and bigger smiles. I was in my element. Tongs in hand, a cold glass of sweet tea on the side table Elena had bought at a flea market in 1987. I was happy, quietly, completely happy. That's when Vanessa walked over with Brianna beside her. She had a drink in her hand and that smile on her face, the one that meant she had an audience and she intended to use it. "Gerald," she said, loud enough that the nearby conversations began to soften, "can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, turning the brisket. "What does it actually feel like?" She tilted her head and her smile widened. "To be the failure of the family." The yard went quiet the way yards do when something terrible has been said out loud. A sudden, horrible stillness. I heard Renee's sharp intake of breath. I heard Thomas put down his plate. I heard one of the grandchildren, I think it was little Maya, say grandma to nobody. I turned and looked at Vanessa, really looked at her. And I smiled. Not a small, embarrassed smile, not the smile of a man swallowing his dignity. I smiled the way Alina used to smile when someone underestimated her, wide, warm, and absolutely unshakable. The smile of a person who knows exactly who they are. I wouldn't know, I said simply, and turned back to my brisket. The silence stretched. Vanessa laughed sharp, a little uncertain now, and looked to Brianna for support. Brianna was suddenly very interested in her phone. And then Marcus spoke. My son, my quiet, steady, soft-hearted son, walked across that deck with a look on his face I had never seen before. Not anger exactly, something deeper. The look of a man who has held his tongue for years and just watched the one person he could never repay get publicly humiliated in a way he couldn't pretend away. He stopped beside me, not beside Vanessa, beside me. Dad, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on that single word. I owe you an apology. I shook my head, son. No, he turned to face the yard, to face everyone. I want to say something, I need to say something. The remaining conversations died completely. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity. Renee stood with her hand pressed to her mouth. Thomas had his arm around her. My father, Marcus began, and I had to look away because I knew if I kept watching his face, I was going to lose my composure completely. Built his first house with his own hands at 24 years old. He worked double shifts for 3 years so my sister could go to the college she wanted without a single dollar of debt. He sat with my mother every night for the last 8 months of her life, sleeping in that hospital chair, holding her hand, never once complaining, never once making her feel like she was a burden. He paused. He taught me how to change a tire, how to talk to a woman with respect, how to apologize when I'm wrong, and how to stand still when the world is trying to knock me sideways. Marcus's jaw tightened. He is the least like a failure of any person I have ever known in my life. Vanessa was no longer smiling. And this man, Marcus continued, gesturing at the smoker, at the brisket, at the little folding table with Alina's sweet tea glass on it, drove 40 minutes this morning to smoke a brisket for our family because that's who he is, because feeding people is how he loves them, and I let someone disrespect that. He looked at Vanessa then, not with hatred, but with a sadness that was somehow worse. I let that happen more than once, and I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry it took me this long. I put the tongs down. I put my arm around my son. And we stood there at that grill, the same grill where I had taught him to cook at age 9, where Alina had kissed me on 100 summer evenings, where 7 grandchildren had eaten their way through more brisket than I could count, and we held on. Someone started clapping. I think it was Thomas, then Renee, then the neighbors. Even Marcus's work friends, who didn't know the full story, seemed to understand that something important and true had just been said. Brianna excused herself to find her purse. Vanessa stood alone on the deck for a long moment, then she walked inside. I won't tell you that everything was fixed that afternoon. Life doesn't work in clean resolutions. Marcus and Vanessa had hard conversations in the weeks that followed, conversations that were long overdue. I don't know everything that was said. That's their marriage, their business. What I know is that Marcus started coming around more after that day. What I know is that the following Sunday, Vanessa showed up at my door alone, no Brianna, no audience, and said she was sorry, not an elaborate speech. Just 2 words, standing on my porch without the smile. I told her I appreciated it, I meant it. Because here is what 67 years will teach you if you're willing to learn. The people who try to diminish you are almost always fighting a war inside themselves that has nothing to do with you. Vanessa's mother had called her a failure her entire childhood. I found that out later, quietly, from Marcus. She wore cruelty like armor because she'd been taught that tenderness was weakness. That doesn't make what she said acceptable, but it makes it understandable, and understanding is where forgiveness starts. The brisket was perfect that day, by the way. 22 hours of smoke, Alina's dry rub, The grandchildren ate until they couldn't move, and Maya, sweet 7-year-old Maya, crawled into my lap afterward and fell asleep with her head on my chest, and I sat in the yard with the smell of hickory fading into the evening air and thought about my wife. I handled it, I told her somewhere in my mind, just like you would have wanted. I could almost hear her laughing. That full, ridiculous laugh she had that she was always trying to contain and never quite could. I smiled. The same smile I'd given Vanessa. The smile of a man who knows exactly what he's built, exactly who he's loved, and exactly how little he needs the approval of someone who has never once tried to know him. I am Gerald Hutchins. I am not a failure. I am the man who tends the fire. And I will be here, at this grill, as long as these hands can hold the tongs.